Alrighty, I welcome everybody to the second session of our Ukrainian history and identity series. Like I said last time, it's an exciting series to be able to have, although we acknowledge it's for very unfortunate circumstances. Today, we are particularly thrilled because it's more than just me and David who will be talking. We have people from Cleveland and people over in Ukraine and Poland as well. And we're hoping for a fantastic conversation, right? And that's what we're really hoping for today. Officially, we go until 3:10, but for anybody who wants to continue chatting afterwards, I will be happy to do so. And I know a number of our other participants are also happy to do so. Just very quickly to introduce who we are doing the talking. I'm Matthew Phillips. I teach history here at Cuyahoga Community College. I have a background in U.S. foreign relations, empire, and its intersection with culture. Renata, you're going to want to mute your side. All right. David, if you want to get in on that camera. Right here. Just introduce yourself real quick.
I'm David Bernatowicz. I'm an associate professor of history here on Metropolitan Campus. My fields are Eastern European history, medieval history, and U.S. history.
And then Renata, do you want me to introduce you since you're not in the camera? Or?
Hi, I'll wave and then Maggie.
Okay, and with us as well, we have a lecturer of political science, Renata Cos-Carmati, who is a graduate of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy and Case Western University. She studied at University of Strasbourg in France, focusing on human rights and international law, as well as in Ukraine, one of the first Americans to study at the International Relations faculty. She later returned to Ukraine as a postgraduate Fulbright scholar and has worked in public policy and education in Ukraine, Hungary, Washington, D.C., and now here in Cleveland. We're very happy to have her on board with us. We also will have 4 guests today, so we're going to have a lot of possible threads to talk about. So quickly, what I want to do is introduce each of our guests, and the plan is we'll introduce them. I'll have a little bit of a opening conversation with each guest individually. And then after that point, David and Renata will take over to shape the conversation from there. But we're also hoping for a number of questions from the audience in the chat. And as well, the participants, yourselves, please feel free to ask questions of each other as we go in the second half of this. I think that would be really interesting. All right. So in no particular order, we have with us today Corrylee Drozda, who is a senior attorney at the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland, where she represents low-income and vulnerable immigrant survivors of violence and crime. Her practice focuses on removal, defense, asylum, and other forms of humanitarian-based immigration. In addition to her direct representation of clients, Corrylee is the co-chair of Legal Aid's Language Equity Committee, which is dedicated to ensuring that individuals with limited English proficiency have access to justice and community services, regardless of the language they speak. She is also a member of Legal Aid's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Volodymyr Dubovec, did I do justice to your name, sir?
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you.
You did great.
At any point, anybody, feel free to correct us. It's how we learn. Oh, and you got your video set up perfectly.
You saw me here.
What's that?
Yes, I did.
Nice. Volodymyr is an assistant professor at the Department of International Relations and
associate professor.
Associate professor, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Department of International Relations and director of the Center for International Studies at Odessa Mechnikov National University in Ukraine. He has conducted research at the Kennan Institute, Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, at the Center for International and Security Studies at the University of Maryland, taught at the University of Washington in Seattle, and at St. Edward's University / University of Texas. He is the co-author of Ukraine and European Stability, which came out in 1999, and has published numerous articles on U.S.-Ukraine relations, regional and international security, and Ukraine's foreign policy. So many other things we can talk about, sir, beyond just displacement. Areas of expertise include Ukraine, transatlantic relations, the United States, and Black Sea security. Ludmila Nadutova, I do justice to your name?
Nadutova, yeah, you are right.
Nadutova, thank you. Born in 1954 in Western Ukraine. From 81 till 2006, she served in the SBU, which was previously the KGB. In 2006, she resigned in the rank of lieutenant colonel and switched into the private sector when she worked for the communications company or telecom as an interpreter and technical writer. After retiring, she lived in Kyiv. On February 28th, she left because of the war, and since March 7th resides in Krakow, Poland. And then Christina Tinkolyuk, how'd I do?
Yeah.
Good, thank you. Teacher of English as a second language, also works as a translator. Graduated from the National Technical University of Oil and Gas in Ivano-Frankivsk, which is Western Ukraine. She is not a stranger to Cleveland, as she visited here as a volunteer camp counselor for the Ukrainian scouting organization Plus. Nice. Additionally, she participated in research documenting the history of the organization Plus here in Cleveland, founded on the scouting principles of Baden-Powell in Ukraine in 1911 and brought to Cleveland by the post-World War II refugees from Ukraine. Central to her life is her 3-year-old daughter, who has been traveling with her as they became refugees of this war. So again, I thank you all very much for joining us. I believe, what are you, 6 hours ahead of us? So it's 8 p.m. there?
In Ukraine,
Yeah.
it's 9. It's 7 now.
9. All right, so thank you for meeting with us this evening.
It's all right. It's all right. We hardly slept for the last month.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
So the opening questions I have, well, let me talk about the event in general first and sort of the themes we're hoping to have come up. So a little bit of introduction for those of you who are in the audience is that since the Russian invasion began, a quarter of the Ukrainian population, over a quarter, has left their homes, over 10 million people. More than 4 million people leaving the country altogether, the largest number to neighboring country of Poland to the west. This is the largest crisis of its kind in Europe since World War II. There is a monumental personal story for everybody involved. And my first questions will deal with more of that side of things. And as this unfolds, we're also seeing that there's so many different structures that are involved that shape people's lives, how they move from point A to point B, how they're received in Poland or the United States or elsewhere. And so I imagine our conversation will deal with the connections between those structures and the personal experience, as well as issues of culture, identity, what it means to be Ukrainian, what it means to be displaced, so on and so forth. Audience, again, as we go, please send your questions in the chat box. It looks like we already have some coming in, and that's wonderful. And so, in no particular order, but since Ludmila, your video is showing up largest for us, I thought I'd start with you. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit, you're retired now, correct?
I am retired.
I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what your life was like in the time before the invasion. I mean, I'm not talking about like a big biography, but a little sketch. And then what it was like to transition into this new reality of when the invasion first began and then everything you've experienced since then.
You know, I had a feeling and I was sure that the war should start. That's why I was worrying greatly. But before I had some students and I taught English for them. And then on the 24th of February, the war started, and I live in the north of Kiev, and that was the first invasion. This special group rushed into Kiev, and not far from my home, there was fighting, and I heard these sounds of machine guns and bombs, mines. I don't know what it was, but it was scarcing. It was awful. It was my first experience. And then I spent mostly a week in the shelter because during the night it was the sound of bombing, of shelling. I don't know what it was. And then my daughter insisted, and I decided to leave Kiev and with a train. It was not so easy to get to the train, and that time the train was free, and I and my mother of my son-in-law, we left to Kiev. It was rather hard travel, journey because we were standing, their train was overcrowded. And then we came to Lviv and we spent 3 days in Lviv, and by car we got to the border and crossed the border, and Poland welcomed us. People were very kind with us, and I am very thankful for Polish people. They provided us with residence, with dwelling, and we are still here. That is my short story how we got to Poland.
How long have you been in Poland now?
About a month.
About a month. All right, well, I thank you for
Thank
sharing
you.
that with us. And as we get into more of the conversation later, unless there's anything you want to ask now, we'll obviously get into this a lot more. But
No, that's okay.
okay, yeah. Let's see. And Volodymyr?
And I would say that we left everything in Kiev. I took only this change of my clothes and my documents, nothing more.
When you left, did you have any expectation of how long you might be gone, or is it just a complete set of
No
unknowns?
no idea. But I thought, I had a feeling that that should be for a long time.
Can you
Rather
describe
long
what it's like to have this newly placed Ukrainian community in Poland with you now?
People who were with me, they were worrying, they were nervous. They couldn't expect that the war could last more than several days, but it appeared more than months. And in Poland, people are very kind. They organize a lot of help centers for Ukrainians. They offer living room. They offer meal, a lot of things, and people are very friendly, and we are thankful for them. They are real friends for Ukrainians.
Thank you. And Volodymyr, if I could ask the same set of questions of you, a little bit of what your life was like before, and then the experience of the transition into the invasion, and having, I looked at your Facebook page a little bit earlier and saw what you had written about the experience of sirens going off. And if you could talk a little bit about that feeling of finding yourself in a new world, and also what your story is of displacement, of where you were and where you've ended up.
Right. Well, first of all, I'm an internally displaced person. So unlike two other panelists, I'm not a refugee. I'm here in Ukraine, but I'm not at hometown of Odessa. I'm now in Western Ukraine, not far from the city of Lviv, like millions of other Ukrainians. Well, I moved over months ago, and it wasn't easy to say goodbye to the city where I was born and raised and lived for so many years. My hometown of Odessa, but I was expecting it to be attacked savagely, quickly, and that didn't happen, actually. Frankly, it's still puzzling to many of us why Odessa wasn't attacked in a similar way that many other Ukrainian cities were. There might be some explanations here, but I don't think it's appropriate to speak about it right now. Well, I am away from I don't have immediate family like wife and kids, but I have my mom who is in Odessa. She's a senior citizen. She didn't want to move, and she frankly couldn't move, so I really worry about her being there. I mean, obviously I talk to her all the time, but many times per day. So that's my main worry about Odessa. In the last weekend, there have been some attacks, there have been some missiles fired at Odessa. Fortunately for Odessans, they were not directed at the civilian buildings or big apartment buildings or individual houses. They were directed at infrastructure facilities like oil refinery and oil reservoirs and things like that. But still, it's not nice. And there have been a constant barrage of drones over heads of Odessans. and then the anti-aircraft guns are shooting at them, and that creates quite a noise, and people are scared with all of that. But then they're getting used to it. Over months, I'm already hearing my friends and family members in Odessa saying, well, it's no big deal, it's just PVO. I mean, it's just anti-aircraft weapons working, that's all. So they're getting used to it. I mean, there've been a couple of cases when Russian battleships kind of got close to the seaside, Odessa, and then, well, I'm probably deviating a little because it's not my personal story. I'm not there, but I'm telling you how my city lives now, using the words of people who are there. And those battleships, they shelled Odessa several times, but primarily somehow in different suburbs, not in the areas that have a high density of population. So I don't know what their game was, what the point of all of that was. Maybe intimidation, maybe checking out Ukrainian coast artillery or something like that. They were probably thinking about doing a amphibious landing in Odessa, but then decided against it. And the ground forces are stuck around 70 miles east of Odessa, near city of Mykolaiv. They couldn't get through, and that's why they couldn't get closer to Odessa. And the battleships mostly returned back to their bases in Crimea, and they're sending them missiles from there. Those missiles can reach any target in Ukraine, including here in Western Ukraine. Most of the missiles were launched from the Black Sea Navy of Russia, and they are going through many hundreds of kilometers, and they still hit the targets. I'm here in the city, which is full of refugees, or as an internally displaced persons. Yes, that's a major distinction here. It's full of people who don't want to have divided families. So to emphasize the ages of 18 and I'm one of those two. So I couldn't leave. I mean, at the same
And
time,
I'm
a lot of
sorry,
people
but
like
your video
myself,
broke up there for a second.
Okay. No, I couldn't leave, so that's why I'm here. And that's many people are in the same situation here because they don't want to, divide their families. That's why they want to stay with their men, their brothers, their husbands, and so on. And that's why a lot of those people are here. And I think for many of them, it's easier than going abroad, not knowing what happened to them abroad. For some of them, it's easier just to be surrounded by compatriots speaking the same language. For some of them, it's cheaper too, so you don't know what happened. But those people are in many ways, unfortunately, the IDPs, internally displaced persons. Many of us are invisible to the international community, frankly, because refugees are much more visible. First of all, they're counted, that we know the number, and they're registered. And they're getting some assistance, whether it's a national government of the country hosting them, or local government, or some NGOs, some volunteers. Here with IDPs, you hardly register. I mean, that's why I don't really believe the numbers, like 6.5 million IDPs. It's probably much more than that. So I would say closer to 1/3 of the population of Ukraine is displaced, not 1/4. I actually talked to the other roundtables on the same subject in the last weeks, and there were some people who are studying migration, and they said that usually very informal, very rough estimate is you multiply number of refugees by 3. If that is the formula, then you have 4 million and multiply by 3, then you have quite more, quite more than 6.5. And that's a problem because a lot of these people, some of them had some savings. They can rent housing here and provide food and shelter for their families and themselves, but some don't really. I mean, they are left without jobs. Their jobs are destroyed by war. They're not getting salary on time. And they're struggling. They're struggling. I actually saw people here in supermarkets, and it was obvious they were struggling with what they can actually afford to buy. So, I mean, I probably talk more about other people than myself because I got easy, I think. I mean, I know bumps falling on my head. And I'm working from here. I'm doing online teaching for my students. Yeah. And I also do a lot of events like this one and many interviews. I mean, there's all sorts of journalists from all over the world talking to me. I mean, from Singapore and Taiwan to Chile and Brazil. I mean, all sorts of time zones, I'm trying to accommodate all those requests for the interviews as well. So I think that's my duty as someone who's doing, this field of international relations, trying to explain what's going on. And what's going on is a massive, massive, massive war, and a war of annihilation, really, because now we see this ethnic cleansing, really. Well, is it genocide? I don't know, but it's clearly ethnic cleansing and war crimes committed in various little towns and villages around Ukraine. And I just hope that people in the West would support Ukraine even more than they did in the first months of the war. it's going to be a protracted war. So we'll be hanging in here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I appreciate you talking not only about yourself, but other people as well. As we get into more of the conversation, you've presented quite a bit that I think we would like to explore more, like the classroom experience, what it's like for your students. The one other question I think I had at this point was, I don't know if you specified what city you're in now or not, but what was the decision making for where specifically you would go? Was that guided by like family members? Was it guided by your job? Or, you know, like what was the calculation for why you ended up where you are now?
So it's a combination of factors, really. First of all, I mean, anyone understood that you need to get away as far away as you can from a front line, potential front line. And since early in the conflict, we all expected Odessa to be one of the first cities to be attacked. You know, I didn't waste much time before I moved. I didn't wait for Russian troops to come closer to Odessa. Odessa is strategically located in such a way that it's very easy to besiege it and encircle it and cut it away from the rest of Ukraine. So that would be a problem. And frankly, quite frankly, I mean, I'm known in the city for my public position, which is strongly pro-Ukrainian and pro-NATO, pro-US, pro-West, you know, basically. And, you know, it's exactly this kind of people that occupiers coming into town are looking for. So I didn't want to be one of those. You know, I didn't want to be one of those bodies in the street. And that's why I moved out, and that's why I'm here, you know. And I'm staying in a little, what we call sanatorium. It's like a little spa resort town. It's called Truskovets, so it's well-known kind of place where people come for mineral water. But the crowd here is quite different. You know, I actually saw some people who were here before the war. That was the usual kind of teachers from various schools and kindergartens here in the region. Right now, it's IDPs. It's people who are traumatized, people from lower Ukraine. I'm hearing them speaking all sorts of accents, and I recognize, okay, this person is probably from Sumy or Kharkiv, and this one is probably from Donetsk or Donetsk area, and this one is could be even from Odessa. A lot of people from Kyiv, obviously. I mean, Kyiv is a big city, so a lot of people left Kyiv, but some are returning right now, even though the mayor Klitschko says don't rush it. You know, don't have to rush coming back to those cities. So dangerous, and even more. Those little towns outside of Kyiv that were recently liberated. There is so much danger there. Buildings falling apart, mines everywhere. Actually, mines are everywhere in Odessa too. Our beaches are mines as well. And just on the other day, there was a couple who neglected to pay attention to the signs, and they got to the beach in their car, and it exploded. One person died, and one was severely injured. So that's how Odessa is actually getting ready for the invasion. Also, the sea outside of Odessa is mined by Russians, and that's a problem. I mean, definitely not a topic of our conversation, but just for you to understand, because it's little noticed, hardly noticed by Western media, there is almost 100 ships from various countries blocked in Ukrainian Black Sea ports. They couldn't leave. Russians are not allowing it, and now there are mines. And actually, mines are moving around the Black Sea. So the other day, Turks found one in Bosphorus. You know, that's the kind of situation you have there in the region. So it's not pretty.
Well, that just
would
reinforces.
like to see.
Oh, sure.
I'm sorry. Can I add a little bit? Those people who were in the outskirts of Kiev and then they were released, they say that they are not allowed to go in the forest around, in the fields around, because all these territories are mined. It's very dangerous to do this. And Russians, what they did, they even put mines into bodies of the dead, and they also mined the cemeteries as well. And it's unbelievable, but it is very dangerous to move in the cities which were released. And now our miners, they try to get rid of these devices of explosion, which could be exploded.
And I think that reinforces, you know, that when we talk about displaced people, or the word that's kind of going more out of favor now, refugee, that oftentimes it's talked about as if there's the war and there are the people who are getting away from the war. But in reality, this is a war on the civilians overall. And whether you're displaced but got out safely, you're still part of the war. And then when you're
Absolutely.
internally in the
Yeah.
country and seeing all of this, you know, I mean, that is the war itself. It's not like the war is
Right.
in the east and then there's displacement over there. It is
It's
all
a
of the
good point.
war.
The war travels with you. Yes, that's true. Yeah.
And so
We have friends who we have left, and we have a lot of people, and we start our day with reading news from Kiev, from Ukraine, and just we share all these sorrows and all these cares being here.
and I see, Christina, you got connected back again. And so to put the spotlight on you for a few minutes, I'd like to ask the same opening question I've asked our other guests, which is if you could take a couple minutes to explain a little bit about your life before the invasion and then how it changed as the invasion unfolded and how it led you to going from where you were to where you are now.
Okay. I'm sorry. I might get a bit emotional, but I hope I don't. I just have to warn you. So, basically, I am a teacher. I teach English online to majority of my students are Ukrainians. Some of them live abroad. Some of them are foreigners. So I teach online and I stay with my family in a mountain village in the Carpathian Mountains. I was woken up on Thursday morning, on Thursday night, by my dad's knock on the door. And so just he said that it has started and we have to move. That's when we moved further into the mountains. And I had to make a decision whether to stay in Ukraine or to move abroad. And my decision was based on my daughter, basically. So I had to provide some kind of security for her and to make sure she's safe and she's not, she doesn't see anything or she doesn't hear anything. So on Saturday we moved out. I actually have a little map, if I could share, of my journey. So what I can say that I'm back in Ukraine. If just a moment.
I think if I make you co-host, oh no, you're actually able to do it now.
Yeah. So okay. So we made a decision to move out of Ukraine somewhere just right outside the border to wait a week or two maximum and go back because we could not imagine that anything like that could last longer. So we went to Romania, then Hungary and Slovakia because there we have friends in Slovakia who hosted us for some time. I was traveling with my sister-in-law, whose mother is in Italy. So we went to Slovakia just to make sure she's safe, my daughter is safe. I actually was hesitant whether I want to go and do something or just to move abroad. So we stayed there for a few days and then we realized that we have to do something else. So my sister-in-law decided to go to Italy to her mom. We went to Poland to the airport and I stayed with some other friends there for another month, I guess. So it's every week I said, so just one more week and then we are going home, and another few days and then we'll go home. And my daughter was asking more and more questions like why we cannot go back home, where is daddy and stuff like that. So I promised her that we will go on a little trip. We'll see on the seaside, and after the seaside we'll be able to go back home. So we went to Slovenia to show her the sea. And I was just postponing. I was waiting for a safe time to go back home. And after all the events in Bucha and after all the things that are happening, I realized that of course, it's getting, different. So it's my father's birthday tomorrow. And as we live in the west of Ukraine, we decided to come back at least for a few days, as living abroad is not like living at home. Even if you're staying with acquaintances or friends, if you, even these are not strangers, it's still not easy. So here I am. It might sound crazy, as when you're outside reading all the news and you know, reading all the events that are happening, like I could not imagine that I would be back here, but yeah. And it's my first day back home, and I get very mixed feelings, as when you switch off the air raid alarm system and when you don't read the news, you might try to imagine that everything is fine, but it's not. Yeah. So yeah, that's the short story.
Well, thank you very much for not only joining us, but doing it on your first day back here. And your map brings up something that I think we can explore a lot more in our conversation as well, is that, you know, our next speaker is going to be talking about the United States. A lot of our focus has been on Poland, but there are a number of other countries involved as well. You know, Moldova, Romania, Hungary, and really everybody in that loop that you mentioned. Although Poland, I believe, has received more than all the other European countries combined. What I would like to do now is switch to our fourth guest, who's going to be coming in from a different angle altogether, and that is Corrylee Drozda from Legal Aid Society, senior attorney there. And I have obviously a different set of questions, but also sort of intro questions to kind of bring what will be your contribution to the conversation here. And the one is sort of what might seem like the boring question in relation to all of the personal stories we've heard, but very important. And that's if you can give us sort of the nuts and bolts of the sorts of laws and processes that are connected to displacement, whether you're speaking internationally or specifically here in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. Just, yeah, before I start, I just want to thank.
And it's not boring, by the way.
Oh, to many, I'm sure. It definitely is not as exciting sometimes as other things. But I just wanted to say to the other guests, just thank you so much for sharing your story and, you know, working with my clients. That's just the most amazing part of my job, is just hearing about their stories. And I just love being able to like help them tell their stories, and just think that yeah, it makes the world, and definitely our country, but everywhere that you are, a better place. So thank you for being here. So yeah, like was already said, I'm an immigration attorney, and so my focus is definitely on kind of the processes here in the United States. So I thought I could kind of just give some basics of options for Ukrainians, but certainly for displaced people, you know, generally it would apply anywhere, and kind of divide it up from sort of temporary protections or immigration statuses, and then more permanent forms, and do that from the perspective of someone outside the United States, and then someone who may already be here in the United States, or, you know, at the border somewhere trying to get into the US. So for Ukrainians or displaced people who are, you know, outside the United States, one option, this is a temporary form of immigration status, meaning that it doesn't lead to a permanent pathway to stay here in the United States. So that's usually, it's what you might have heard as a green card or lawful permanent resident status. And having that status then makes you eligible to apply for citizenship if the person is interested in that. So temporary means you can stay here and usually like with permission, and usually work lawfully, but that's it. You know, nothing else. So if you're outside the United States, you can apply for something called humanitarian parole, which is like temporary permission to come into the United States for a really urgent need. And so that's something, for example, that a lot of Afghan evacuees were able to come into the country with humanitarian parole. And you can apply for that if you're seeking entry into the United States, if you're like at a border, or if you're outside the United States and want to come here, or someone who's inside the United States and might have a Ukrainian family member can apply for humanitarian parole on that Ukrainian family member's behalf. And then the more permanent options for people who are outside the United States, if a Ukrainian person has a US citizen or lawful permanent resident family member inside the United States, that person can file a family petition for the Ukrainian family member. And that triggers then a process that would lead ultimately to a green card. That process is a little more complicated and tricky right now because that has to go, well, first of all, everything I'm saying is very lengthy. The immigration process in the United States is just very complicated and convoluted to begin with. And then we have all these processing delays. So it doesn't make it particularly agile to like urgent humanitarian crises like this. But a family petition, that process has to go through a US consulate in like abroad. And obviously the consulate in Kiev is closed. And so the US has allowed like those Ukrainian type of cases to process through the US consulate in Frankfurt and Warsaw and some other cases. So there has been adaptation to that. And then of course, the other more permanent process would be going through the refugee process. And so I'll talk about asylum in a minute. The protections are similar for refugees and asylum seekers in terms of like what it's meant to protect and what you have to prove, but the refugee process takes place outside of the United States. And it involves an interview with a special type of officer, and that process can take several years to be given refugee status. And then if you're approved essentially for refugee status, you would get a resettlement country. And so, the United States accepts refugees, and then you enter the United States as a refugee and have, status here. And so in the United States has announced that it will accept, I think, up to 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. But of course, I think as the speakers have alluded to, a lot of that is taking place, of course, in Europe. And I think that's expected that many Ukrainians would want to stay closer to home. But for those who would maybe want to come here, that would be an option.
I'm sorry, real quick, do you see a difference in preference between like temporary displacement and people who actually plan to come here and then stay? Do you see that to a certain degree?
In terms of like what people would want to do? Or
yeah, like with the current, flow of displaced people out of Ukraine, do you see much interest here on your end with people who are planning to stay and get citizenship versus those who are going to be here until things subside?
Sure. So I have to say, I haven't encountered any Ukrainians who have fled to the United States from Ukraine myself, and legal aid and kind of the immigration advocate community in Cleveland. We're certainly ready and definitely would want to help any displaced Ukrainians who make their way to the United States. But I think like right now that hasn't really happened yet. So I think, with my work, because immigration processes are usually trying to find a way to stay here permanently, or at least having the ability to have, residency here and maybe travel outside of the country or spend some time in a home country or elsewhere and come back to the United States. So I would say most of the clients I work with, generally speaking, from all over the world, are looking to stay here more permanently. And so, yeah, so I can't speak necessarily to the Ukrainians who might be here and feeling that way.
Okay.
Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah. So I thank you, and I'm looking forward to what you can bring into the conversation that follows. And so in the 30 minutes we have now, plus I do want to add that although the event officially ends at 3:10, anybody who wishes to stay after that point and continue the conversation, we are happy to do so. But as we transition now, what we're hoping for is a conversation for the three of us who are in this office together, as well as all the panelists, and bringing in some questions from the audience as we go. I'm actually going to turn things over now to Renata and David.
All right, David, you should probably come over here. This might be easier.
We're getting an echo on you.
All right, how do we do this? All right, well, if you can see me, if you can hear me, then just
Come on.
Can everybody see her and hear her?
How about both of them? So
Yes, all righty.
Alrighty, so displacement is this concept. Can you guys all hear me?
Absolutely.
So this is a concept that infers a break with the natural, right? This is a sense of disorder and chaos. And when an item is displaced, it's not in its proper location. When a person is displaced, she is not in her just location. As such, displacement of individuals opens the floodgates not only concerning economic and physical liberties, it affects personal rights, particularly our very right to existence. Through political philosophy, revolution, military intervention, and anti-human genocide, the European world has gradually returned from these ashes and rebuilt its identity on the concept of personal liberty and freedom. The displacement of individuals that resulted from centuries of wars, of national liberation, and culminating in the unprecedented displacement of individuals into death camps appeared to be the ultimate undoing of humanity. We had a choice of either never killing or displacing people based on their identity and saving our humanity, or succumbing to the dehumanization and elimination of personal liberties of those whose existence was simply denied. Right? We're denying somebody's right to exist as they wish to be. Those who identified, worshipped, or appeared as the other, as themselves. Today, we are asking if Europe, the United States, and the rest of the world remember their struggle for humanity. As we look at the war in Ukraine, we ask why there is a crisis of displaced people in the first place. As a program for racial justice, we address identity and the consequences that come from racial and ethnic injustice. As we strive to gain a deeper understanding of the personal experience of being a refugee, this panel has three questions in mind, really, right? So as we're going to be talking now, these are the three questions we're looking at. One, how is identity the reason for displacement of individuals? How is this identity the source of this conflict, this war, right, in Ukraine? How has displacement affected the identity of those individuals? And thirdly, how has displacement affected their lives, not only immediately, but also their anticipation about their own future, right? So as we're going to be asking these questions, I hope that you use that as sort of the framework that we'll be working in. The first question that we have is actually towards Lyudmila. Lyudmila, you were formerly a KGB agent, SBU later, right? Which is, if we want to translate that into sort of US standard, it would probably be like the FBI. But the KGB has a little more ominous connotations, right? And we know that ideology is a very important part of forming identity, right? And the reason I'm starting with this is because the perpetrator of this war is somebody who's perpetrating the war on the basis of identity. He is a KGB agent who spent about 30 years mixing and matching and trying to identify an ideology that would match an identity. How do you think that Ukrainian people have fit into his notion, his ideology, and his notion of identity, and how this notion allows him to think that it justifies war crimes and this unprovoked war against Ukraine for its very existence? That's for Ludmila.
I like to say that ideology is very important, but you know, and we shouldn't forget about the genocide. The genocide started not 2 days ago or during this war. It started 100 years ago, or maybe even longer. And this violence and substitution and displacement of the local people, of Ukrainians in particular, was the main technique applied by Bolsheviks that time. And now Putin, and he follows the rules of Bolsheviks. What he is doing now? He is displacing people and having, I think, not only one aim to get rid of Ukrainians from their territory, to dissolve them among the other people in the world, but also to make chaos in Europe and to make economical problem for Europe and for the other countries all over the world, which they sincerely, I don't speak about Putin, and Putin, I mean the government, but all the residents of Russia, they consider enemies for themselves personally, and we can see it from letters, from telephone calls tapped by I don't know, security service, by communication service in Ukraine, and even children, they say that to their fathers that they have to kill those awful Ukrainians, you know, and come back home as fast as it is possible. And besides, before I cannot say that the war started on the 24th of February. It was at the hot stage of the war, but since 2014, Russia collected a great amount of troops around the border of Ukraine, and the number of these troopers hasn't been changed since that dramatically. During this time, there was a social network, so-called chat roulette, which could connect people. For example, I just enter this chat roulette and I can be randomly connected to any residents of Russia in the north, in the south, everywhere. And all of them, they think that they are sure that Ukrainians have no rights for their lives. They should be killed, simply. Western people, this Europe, they all immoral, and they also have to be punished or killed. Americans are their direct enemies, and they also have to be wind, something like this. And it's the common idea and of Russians. And what about the identity of Ukrainians? People, especially after this second Maidan in 2014, I should say that young generation was brought up, and this generation was aimed to rebirth, to restore Ukraine. They started speaking Ukrainian at home, a lot of them. And for example, my granddaughter, who is 20, and my family, my daughter, her husband, and her daughter, my granddaughter, they're speaking Ukrainian in the family, and I speak with them, and a lot of other young people at schools, they're speaking Ukrainian. It's a rule for them now. And after this invasion, a lot of people, even who speak Ukrainian poorly, they try to speak Ukrainian and not Russian. And Putin, in spite of his intentions and aims, he managed to unite Ukrainian people and to make them aware of their identity as Ukrainian people. And even those, I would like to mention that in 1928, when Stalin's Russia, Bolsheviks Russia, started industrialization, they substituted Ukrainian population in the eastern, these industrial regions. And for example, Zaporozhye, it was a small city, Alexandrovsk, of 5,000 residents. And then immediately when they started building Dnieprogas, the number of residents increased to 800,000. And it is still now. And the problem of this eastern Ukraine with the substituted population is a little bit different. But after this invasion, most of them would like to stay in Ukraine and to be Ukrainians. And they openly say they, and the example, for example, Kherson, when people, in spite of their occupation, they made meetings with Ukrainian flags, and they opposed peacefully to the occupants. And that is the old history, but it is non-stop genocide coming from at least 100 years ago from these Bolsheviks, Bolshevik Russia. And people here also who emigrate, some of them, they intend to stay abroad. But, you know, when the war started and people began to flee from Ukraine, their husband took them to the borders and came back, in particular to Kiev, where they either joined the army or the Ukrainian army, or they organized the local troops of groups of defense.
The territorial defense?
What do you say? I'm sorry.
The territorial defense units?
Yeah, defense units, local defense units. They are there, and I know a lot of them personally, and they didn't want to stay in from Kiev, for example. They do not want to stay in Western Ukraine, or they make some groups of volunteers who take care of physically disabled children or newborn children, and they took care of them. They come back to their occupied cities and tried to take them out to Western Ukraine or abroad, but they are still in Ukraine. That's why I don't think that a lot of, I don't know, frankly, but at least now I know a lot of people, these parted families, they intend to go back as soon as the war finishes.
So, Ludmila, what I'm understanding here is this idea, this concept of identity is something that is organic, it grows, it changes. Today, perhaps, and especially after this war, what it means to be Ukrainian may be a very different thing than it meant a month ago, 2 months ago, or 7 years ago. And actually, that sort of transitions us to Volodymyr. I'm going to take you back to your city of Odessa. And Odessa, for those who aren't familiar with Ukraine, is very similar to New Orleans, right? It has this very eclectic, very dynamic port city, diverse population. And as a result of this, what we see is the formation of identity that is unique, right? And so we know that, there's Ukrainians, and then there was always this notion of there's an Odessit, right? So I would like to ask you a little bit, Volodymyr, what you think about this role of integrating language and different ethnic backgrounds and different religious backgrounds into one common identity. Did we lose Volodymyr?
Oh, we don't have your sound.
Muted.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
There
I
we
put it away now and put it back. Yes, great question, Renata. Thank you. And I'm hearing the echo of the views of Blair Rubel. You did work under him, right? You were in Canada when he was director? Yeah.
Yes, we actually did a lot of projects with him together in Odessa.
Yeah, he was really big on this connection and comparison between New Orleans and Odessa in many ways. But yes, Odessa is multi-ethnic, is cosmopolitan, is very liberal, normally tolerant, even though we had some fights, including one infamous episode really from May 2nd, 2014, when we had the infighting within the city and 48 people ended up dead. So that kind of broke a little bit the stereotype about Odessa being super tolerant city and so on. But yes, you also had a sizable segment of pro-Russian citizens and residents in the city as well. So, but they're probably still there, but their views are changing because after all, Odessa and other cities now going through difficult times caused by Putin. So whatever place there was for Russian wars, and that's a concept of Putin, of expanding the community of Russian, ethnic Russians and Russian speakers at the expense of other countries neighboring Russia where those people would live. This concept is pretty much dead because he chose, instead of using the soft power, he opted this time around for hard power only, military tools. He understood probably that he's losing Ukraine, so the only way not to lose Ukraine completely would be to subdue it, subjugate it, force it to get on the knees, and capitulate. And he's bombing specifically the cities in the east and the south, where you actually have most of those ethnic Russians and Russian speakers and people who had harbored some sympathies for Russia. So he's basically killing any future for any pro-Russian sentiment, pro-Russian political parties here in Ukraine. That's one of the paradoxes, of this whole invasion. If you think about the future, he's losing bigly, as one former president of the United States used to say. That's it. And Odessa identity, therefore, is becoming more pro-Ukrainian by day, if not by hour. People are really consolidating here. In general, in Ukraine, the 2014, the start of Russian aggression, was the first wave of consolidation. And since 24th of February this year, it's another wave, which the previous was a small wave, and now it's a tsunami. It's a tsunami of national consolidation. Everyone is rallying around the flag. Everyone is upset. Everyone, even those people, like I said, pro-Russian people who are sitting now in the shelters in Kharkiv or in the metro station in Kharkiv for weeks awaiting, trying to escape Russian bombs. I don't think they're going to have any sympathy for Russia in the future, no. So that's changing our identity. We understand who the enemy is, and that's going to be probably a mortal enemy. It's going to be probably a permanent enemy. We always had this through many of us through the prism of this concept of significant other, and Russia is obviously our significant other, to the extent that one former president, Mr. Kuchma, Lenin Kuchma, once wrote a book which was called "Ukraine is not Russia," and some people were kind of laughing, like, "What kind of name of the book is that?" But actually, it is a basis for our national identity in many ways. Yes. There are many other roots and cultural roots and heritage and traditions. Of course, we base our identity on that as Ukrainians. But having this significant other who is trying to subjugate us all the time, who is trying to keep us on a short leash in their sphere of influence or control, or even they had us in their state, within their state for centuries, it helps. And right now we understand that where the enemy is, and there's no confusion about that. And that's changing, especially with the younger generation. I'm teaching now to the students, and I see it in them, the way they are fluent in Ukrainian, the way they present their views. Just the other day, I think it was yesterday actually, yes, there was a defense of papers, course paper, so to speak. So the student would write a big essay every year, essay, and defend it. And they defended it, and they shown the first and second year actually, students, and they shown their views being professional for their age enough, and also patriotic. And that gives me hope for the future of Ukraine. But of course, it would be shame if they would if they would leave. And some already left. I'm teaching now, and I don't know where my student is coming in from. All right, where they're sitting. I'm not asking. Okay, and I don't know when the professors are. A big part of my department is already abroad. Female part of my department who can leave. Right. So I cannot, and I'm here, and most of my other men, and that I know in my profession, they're also here, obviously. And you see, it's difficult. They are traumatized, the students. All right, they don't know what to do. If there is air raid siren, should we actually go to the shelter? We don't know. Neither here in Western Ukraine nor in Odessa, because it's not that bad as it is in Mariupol or Kharkiv or Sumy or some other places. So if there is air raid sirens, probably doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a bomb or missile coming into your house where you are right now. So most people are kind of relaxed in that particular respect. Until they come closer and they start shell you with a long-range artillery, for instance, that's going to be a bit more difficult situation. So in terms of identity, yes, there is a tremendous consolidation. We've never seen the people closer to the government as it is right now. In our contemporary Ukrainian political history, over 30 years, it's never been like this. When the president speaks for the people and people pays back with a lot of respect to Zelensky, including a lot of people who didn't like him a lot, who didn't vote for him, who thought that he made a lot of mistakes. But right now he's a wartime leader, and he's actually making most of the right moves in terms of PR, at least, in terms of talking to the people, explaining what's going on, giving them hope, refusing to leave Kyiv, the capital city. He's been offered several times by Americans, we'll give you an airlift, we need to save you. There are Russians coming to kill you. There have been several teams sent to Kyiv to kill him specifically. And he said, no, what he said, probably you heard this phrase, I'm not looking for the right, I need ammunition. So that's what he's gonna get. And more of it, hopefully, because this had been a NATO summit the other day, the G7 meeting, American Congress, U.S. Congress is, doing important steps just as we speak. Already took away the status of a preferred trade nation status of Russia, away from Russia, and other things, and more sanctions are coming in. So that's the right thing. But for Ukrainians, we understand where the enemy is and where the friends are, and that's exactly the moment when you kind of understand your positioning, your role, your space in this world. And Ukrainians are not, really wasting much time in doing that. There are many habits changing. We used to say good day, for instance, like Dobry Den. Right now, we're kind of doing away with this because not a single day has been good, to us. There've been all sorts of trauma, and that people are trying to find out some alternative ways to actually greet each other, because you can't say good day when you're seeing people dying and so on. And there is also this, I've just noticed today, and we had a discussion on my Facebook page as well. People already saying before the war, this expression, which used to be reserved for the Great War, the Second World War, a Great Patriotic War of 1949, 1945 for most of us. When the people were saying, the older generation, before the war and after the war, there was a major division. There is now, this division is appearing, and we don't know how long this war will be. So people are already using the expression before the war and after the war. It's a different life. It's different. The reality, it's like a different planet for us. It's basically like what happened before February 24th. It was like in another life for you. So that's,
And
I'm
actually,
seeing it in teaching as well. Yeah, thank you.
It's that transition, right? It's that newness of this experience. A previous life will actually take us to Christina, who has that little life in her hands, right? She has that 3-year-old. And this is she's that future, right? That she's going to have a completely new identity from the people of the last 20 years, right? And this is going to be an identity that's going to be built as a result of all these facts. Now, Christina, is Christina still with us?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
excellent. So Christina, my main question to you is, your job becomes first and foremost now to protect your child, right? To protect yourself, protect your child, because she is that future that Volodymyr is talking about, right? And the big question, and actually Anisha Young was put this into the chat, is like, how do you protect people of Ukraine from this unexpected trauma? Now, you may not have an answer for how you do that for an entire nation, but how are you doing that for your very particular child, your daughter?
Thank you for your question. It's actually not that easy. From the very first days when everything started, when the war started from the 24th, there were different talks among different mothers, as I belong to different communities of mothers and people in my town and scouts and so on, how to talk to children about what's happening, whether we should really tell them the truth or we should protect their psychology, let's say, and not tell them what's happening. So there were two main points of view, and the majority said that based on the age of children, we could tell them what is happening, that it's war. We can say that it's a war. We can say that our enemy is Russia. We can say that with basic concepts that they came to take someone's homes and to, we usually don't talk about killing people, to be honest, at least with 3-year-olds. We use words that are like, softer, to take homes, to send away, and things like that. So what I'm doing is I'm talking about war as little as possible. And when we were abroad, and all this time, I'm using the holiday term. So we went on holiday just to see friends, to be with different people. And I heard many other people saying the same thing. Although with older children, of course, even my child, she's seen the news sometimes. She's heard people crying and talking and discussing things, and she knows more than that I can I give her. But with older children, they understand more, and they talk about Russians and what should be done with Russians, and they shouldn't be sent away from Ukraine and other things. So as for children and as for Ukrainians abroad, for example, we mentioned that all the countries are very supportive. And I've been to Romania and Slovakia and Poland and all these countries. They are helpful not only in terms of providing shelter and giving basic things like food and place to stay for people, but as there are many mothers and children, they also organize things like kindergartens where Ukrainian children can talk to each other and be with each other, because when you move abroad and no one there and all the people around you are using a different language. That's what happened with my daughter. She's always asking now why is everyone using Ukrainian when why they are not using Polish or some other language. She got used to all the people using different languages, and it's very interesting that now she's like, wow, Ukrainian here, Ukrainian there. It's so awesome. So there are kindergartens for children where they talk to you can even talk to a specialist about things that are in your head, about different psychologists. Children can talk to each other and to psychologists about the things they want to discuss and how they feel and what they experienced if they're
I actually wanted to follow up because you mentioned the scouting organization. PLOST is a scouting organization that was founded in 1911 on the basis of Baden-Powell. And of course, we know that scouting in England actually began as a response to some of the challenges that were happening in sort of post-war scenarios, going back to sort of liberation wars. And so we know that this organization has had a very important part in forming a sense of national identity, national like personal responsibility, personal growth. How do you think that organizations, youth organizations and nonprofit organizations, what role can they have in the next couple of months of maintaining that traumatic experience and trying to normalize daily life? And what role do you think they're going to play once this war is over?
Yeah, so as a Scout organization, PLAST, and many other organizations like SUM and so many different organizations, non-governmental organizations, are doing like tremendous work now. As we stayed in Poland for some time, and I volunteered that I'm here. I am PLAST member. There are PLAST members there.
Yeah.
So we started coordinating our actions and trying to plan what we can do. So basically what can be done is trying to provide the routine. Who knows what is a toddler is a person that needs routine, and any person needs to know at least what's going to happen in the next day or in the next week. It's very difficult to live when you don't know what's going to happen in the next hour. So by giving them the routine of going to school and then doing some extracurricular activities like meetings with Scout members is something super important. But what we know that Scouting organization PLAST is not only about living in the nature and doing some fun stuff, but it's also about talking about history in a fun way. So by playing games, by providing different activities for children, they discover what happened throughout history with Ukrainians, and they could, all children catch things quickly, they analyze things, they talk about things, so it gives them possibility to understand more and to find themselves in wherever they are, and find what they can do and how can they be helpful in some way. So being being helpful is something important. As Volodymyr, I guess, mentioned, that all the Ukrainians are very united now, and we are coordinating our actions and helping with whatever we can, whether we are abroad or inside. And children want to be helpful as well. They want to at least write some, letters, or many of them are also, if these are like teenagers, they are taking part in different volunteering points by even just making tea or talking to people. So yeah, many things are happening, and what can be done is just by giving the children safety, but memory, I guess. Yeah, so we have to remember history and learn with it.
Thank you.
Let me just really quickly say what I put in the chat box, that we have extended this to 3:30. I understand that some people made plans where they had to leave at 3:10, and that's completely fine. But this is a great discussion that I don't want to cut off early. So we are going until 3:10 or 3:30. I mean, 3:30. And I believe David has a question.
I have a question for Corrylee. I am an immigration historian. So after World War II in 1948, the United States government passed the Displaced Persons Act in order to allow for all of the refugees that came out of World War II. Do you see the possibility, if there is an influx of Ukrainian immigrants and requests to the United States, that a similar kind of act will be placed, and a similar type of law and exemptions on American immigration restrictions and legal issues? basically my question. So
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like no, based on just the, I mean, I don't know, it's hard to predict, but just kind of based on the current sort of lack of movement from in Congress on anything immigration related. You know, there was similar talks about, for instance, passing the Afghan Adjustment Act to provide kind of an easier process for Afghan evacuees to be able to like have permanent protection here, and that still hasn't happened. And you know, I'm not sure that it will. But the good news is that you know our current immigration laws do provide pathways for displaced persons like Ukrainians and others. And so when I was talking earlier, I didn't quite get to sort of the options for Ukrainians who might have found their way to the United States or who might already be here. So one example is the Biden administration has already announced or has designated Ukraine for something called temporary protected status. So that is kind of exactly what it sounds like. That can protect people who fled their countries because of, you know, natural disasters or war, to have temporary protection here in the United States. And then, of course, you know, our asylum processes also would protect, would allow a way for Ukrainians to be able to get status here if they find their way, if they're already in the United States or find their way to the border. But yeah, I mean, I hope that there's that, you know, that that there would be additional protections that could be put in place. But like I said, I think the good news is that we have processes here that would allow Ukrainians to kind of have protection. But if I'm not answering your question or misunderstood,
you're answering it. That's a very good answer. I mean, that's the answer that would be expected because we're very slow at changing our immigration laws, as you know. And I doubt if they would even react that quickly. But going back to the idea of the people that have actually are refugees in other countries, the Ukrainians. What do you think the role of, say, the Polish government and all the other various governments in Eastern Europe to the future will be for the Ukrainians living as refugees? Will there be jobs, housing, programs, a long-term
Education, jobs, housing,
long-term changes, you think?
yeah, so I don't know, you know, I don't know exactly all of the immigration laws and policies in different countries, but if their sort of procedures or any policies, procedures, laws on refugees are anything like they are here in the United States, people who are resettled in the United States as refugees, you know, they have permanent status here. It provides them after 1 year of living in the United States, they can apply for lawful permanent resident status, which of course they will be eligible to work. And I should clarify that when they enter as refugees, they have work authorization, so can work here lawfully. They qualify for several like social supports. So that usually goes through designated refugee resettlement agencies that help refugees find housing, you know, jobs, job training, language training. And so our government funds that for, you know, a period of time. They would also qualify for public benefits, you know, like Medicaid, that sort of thing, until they can kind of get on their feet and hopefully, you know, be able to start working and find that. So if, you know, if protections are similar at all in those countries, I would imagine that, you know, that is sort of what would happen there. But of course, it's a challenge when there's such a huge influx of people all at once. I'm sure, you know, they're working really hard to find places for, you know, people to live and to sort of figure out more permanent solutions. So I would imagine that there will need to be additional support from countries in that region, you know, not just Poland or not just one country, because if it seems like this conflict will go on for a while, the whole international community, I would hope, would step up to provide that support.
Yeah, I'll actually add a couple of interesting tidbits to that, because I think Europe is a phenomenal instance of sort of comparative politics versus what's happening in the United States. If at this point in time we are only proposing 100,000 refugee status positions, we know already that that will take years, right? And in the meantime, where's everybody going to stay? And I think that looking at how Europe has come together to help some of the unprecedented things that have happened, for example, a couple of weeks ago already, the Polish government has allowed Ukrainian refugees to obtain what's the equivalent of a social security number. And therefore, they're already getting certain government assistance directly through that. Other countries are saying you can stay, they're sort of delineating, you're welcome to stay here. You will have access to all of our welfare benefits for the next 18 months or 24 months. So they're really delineating, they're trying to make it really clear to the different refugees. Now, of course, what that personal experience on the ground is going to be, that's very different from what we're talking about, like in terms of like government policy and what they're stating and what's happening. But there is a receptiveness and there's a desire to come out there with concrete information. At train stations, you had people standing there. Ludmila could probably talk a little more to this, but I think unfortunately we're out of time, where just really extraordinary scenarios where people were saying, I live in a particular country, I can take this number of people and we can go live in, you know, you can stay with me for this amount of time. So it's happened on the government level and on the personal level as well.
Well, I think with the couple minutes we have, that I would like to hear about that same topic from the perspective of Volodymyr, Christina, and Ludmila, of, you know, what you've seen where if you've been in Poland or in some of these other countries, Christina, as far as what's going on in terms of housing, jobs, education, beyond the charitable goodwill of the local population, if there are organizations or governments also involved. And more of this, I don't want to say fully long-term, but more of this long-term thinking rather than just here's an immediate need to give people food, right? But where do they live? What jobs do they have? How are they getting education, healthcare, all that?
Yeah, so all the countries, as I said, are really helpful here in Europe, including the UK. I don't know about the United States. I think that the thing here is that most of the Ukrainian people, they are going to go back home. So when we hear refugee, we imagine this status when we will not be able to go back home. And so most of the people are searching for options like what Poland did and many countries as well, where you just apply when you come to the government and say, I'm here, I register here, I want to stay here until the war is over, and I will go back home. So they get some social security number or a bank account. They get paid. In most of the countries, it's around 200 euro per month, in order, like in case you have, well, for this expenses that you get. And most importantly, you get a permission to find a job and get your child to go to school or kindergarten. So what people are trying to do is, you know, try to provide their life with some means, so getting a job and a school, because, well, 200 euro is great support, but it's not enough to live in, you know, in any country for a long time. So people are just looking for things temporarily and then to go back home to Ukraine. That's why maybe there are not so many people coming to the United States, because it means a refugee status, yeah, as far as I understand, yeah, a refugee status and not being able to go back home soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Ludmila or Volodymyr, would you like to add to that? Or should we?
I would like
at
to
this
say
point-
that now a lot of people in Ukraine, they have their own small business, a lot of them, and those refugees coming to Western countries, they left their business, they practically left everything at home. That's why most of them are looking for a chance to come back, and that's why they're waiting for the end of the war, and they at least now intend to come back, especially young people, because they think they have more opportunities at home than here.
So I think
so.
Thank you.
I think that last statement from Ludmila really brings home a lot about who these displaced people are. Ukraine is a country which is really almost a sort of middle-class country. It's worked for since 1991 to really build its economy, to develop small businesses, to be entrepreneurial. So that's the good news, right? That there's a certain identity, an entrepreneurial identity that they take with them wherever they go. And we would like to imagine that their choice, their chance for a return will happen soon. And Christina, did you say that today was your birthday?
No, it's my father's birthday tomorrow.
Oh, got it. So I know that in Ukraine, if Christians are celebrating via the Julian calendar, the Annunciation, right?
Yes.
Which is the
Yes.
good news as it was delivered. And we know that on April 24th, which will be an even 2 months since this second part of this war began, is going to be Easter. So we are going to hope that the good news is that by the 24th, we can be celebrating a completely different day.
It would be nice.
Thank you very much for joining and for sharing.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
as we wrap up here, if anybody wants to stay around for a couple minutes to talk about what we can do as Americans or other non-Ukrainians in the room, we are happy to stay around and talk about that. Today, it was absolutely lovely meeting Ludmila, Volodymyr, and Christina, and Corrylee, seeing you for the first time since the pandemic started. And we had about 70 people here. And I put in the chat box that this recording, if it was successful, will be up on our school's Ukraine crisis page, which includes a number of resources for really, I mean, students, but really anybody else to try to get an understanding of the current situation, the history, identity issues like Volodymyr talked about as far as Ukraine versus Russian identity, and also links to a number of these panel events that we've had at various Northeast Ohio schools. So once again, I thank each one of you very much, and I thank everybody who showed up. And now we will stop the recording, and if anybody wants to talk about help, that's what we can talk about next. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.